welcome to this video month in gaming history as we look back at June 1994, and appropriately enough, for our retrospective video series, June 1994 was kind of a lot about retro stuff, retro stuff, and it starts with this Impossible Mission 2025 from Microprose, which aimed to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the original Impossible Mission, which you might have seen if you saw our June 1984 video. So this is a sort of retro redux with new graphics. The original version actually included on the disc, which is an awful lot more fun. This is kind of redone with supposedly fancy graphics for the era and 3 different characters to choose from, and lifts. We'll look at that, and terrible. Whoops, that's not a good start. And god awful frame rate. This is the AGA version of the game, so on an Amiga 1200, the 32-bit systems here, but kind of probably showing off why the Amiga was in the doldrums and part of why Commodore was going downhill. This is a really kind of technically poor. So you see what the screen just turned red there. That's one of the additions that are in this game. If you stay around too long in one spot, you get sniped and you die, and that's it. So the idea of this is similar to the original Impossible Mission, but a little bit different. Is that you've got to roam around these very large platforming levels, killing beasties, and then you kind of have to search and hack into different terminals. And that's the idea. So first of all, you have to find these things, as you saw by the terminal there, and then ride lifts and move places, and nothing happens for most of it. And every time you jump, just really slow animation. And when you do hack into these terminals, you have a little mini game to play, like this kind of Simon style sequence here. So this was another one of the additions. Somebody thought that what Impossible Mission really needed to be was a minigame collection. So this is a little puzzle one, and there's different minigames to play for each terminal to hack. So yeah, goodness knows what benefit that serves, other than to distract you from the fact that the main game isn't. Oh, I screwed that one up. The main game isn't as good as the original was. But yeah, I mean, certainly from a technical standpoint, nowhere near the achievement that Impossible Mission was on the 8-bit micros, and on the Amiga here, there's supposedly a much more powerful thing. It's nowhere near as good. So you get sort of power-ups to go with things here, and big long loading in between each bit. I think I managed to cut most of that loading out, but that stayed in there. Sorry about that. But yeah, you sort of get power-ups along the way that help you search for items faster, and give you little buffs and perks and things like that, and give you guns and things like that. So the risk reward with Impossible Mission, I say the original one, was like, oh, do I have time to search through this item before something creeps up on me? There's a bad guy, gotta shoot. Too late. Just frozen in place there. I do like the little death animations with you disappearing, but at least you do pick up right where you left off, and off we go. We're on our way here. So we're just going to jump over him, since it takes you forever and a day, and we're gradually getting faster. There's some acceleration involved here. We jump over him and do it again. I was staying in place. I've got to hack before the sniper gets me. So yeah, this is another one of those mini games. This time it's a pretty crappy shmup that you have to deal with, because that's what Impossible Mission was all about. And I've screwed this one up here, so I have to go in and I have to hack this thing again, evidently. Yeah, I mean, like, if you think that taking an old favorite of yours and then trying to quote unquote modernize it and just making it a whole lot worse in the process, if you think that's an invention of the 21st century, then think again. God, just after failing that hack, I get plonked back out into game and immediately run over by that robot there. It's alright though, because I can just, oh, fuck, I can just do it again and then die again. I mean, why? Why is that? Where did that car go? Search, it was just stuffed an entire car in my pocket. Yeah, there's, this stuff is just annoying and bad. Whoever thought this was a good idea, I don't know. But again, this was, I don't know, no, it reviewed fairly poorly at the time, and the general consensus was, hey, Impossible Mission, the original, is on the disc, and it's a much better game, so you might as well just enjoy that. I'm gonna get it this time, there's a boss to deal with, I'm dead. So this is just an exercise, I suppose, of doing this sequence long enough to memorize it, and then move on. But screw it, I'm going to steal another car, put that in my gun, I'm going to get, yeah, I'm dead. It's just, I might as well give it one more try since it dropped me off here. And yeah, not good. I suppose the only real highlight of Impossible Mission 2025 is that it's sensible enough to not put jump on up, which often happened with Amiga games. Single button joystick games. It actually puts jump on the fire button, which is quite nice of it. Oh, great. Just this game is terrible. This is not a good start. But there would be plenty more of retro themed stuff in 1994, and much of it pretty good. Just not coming from Microprose. I think the next thing we're going to look at is going to come from a favorite Nintendo property. I suppose it was a common theme in summer of 1994 to resurrect old properties as we go from Impossible Mission 2025 to Donkey Kong 94, or Game Boy Donkey Kong as it's officially known. And yeah, well, it's Donkey Kong but on the Game Boy, except not. It's really amazing. As you can tell, it starts off with this very typical Donkey Kong level, except for the fact that Mario can backflip and handstand by doing various, nifty moves with the D-pad and buttons. So it's really kind of the modern 3D Mario before 3D Mario was about, inside of a 2D world. And even with these fancy moves, you're kind of like, well, okay, this is more Donkey Kong. Here we've got to collect the various items and wait for the ladders to go up. You can collect the hammers to bash enemies and stuff, but it's still fairly typical Donkey Kong, right? Except it's not that. As the further you go, the more kind of elaborate all of these levels are, and you start to realize that you're not playing the typical Donkey Kong anymore. You're playing a very, very different and very, very kind of special puzzle platformer. This would kind of not be touched, but kind of resurrected again as Mario vs. Donkey Kong on Game Boy Advance 10 years later, and then sort of Mario vs. Donkey Kong became its own separate thing and kind of Lemmings-ish and not what Donkey Kong 94 was, which was a shame in a lot of respects. Mario vs. Donkey Kong 2 was fantastic. I love that game on DS. But Donkey Kong, Game Boy Donkey Kong, or Donkey Kong 94 really is just a fantastic game. You can get it on the 3DS if you haven't played it, and I strongly suggest that you do so here. I also like the little comic interstitials in between here, and every time these comic interstitials do more than just have a funny little cutscene, but also show off the next mechanic that gets layered in. So in the next tier of levels, there's keys to deal with. You know, I mean, it's a pretty huge game. There's, I believe, 9 stages of all of this stuff, and it just gets more and more layered and more complex. As you can see now, there's different beasties to avoid and keys to grab. You can jump on top of enemies. You know, the trick with the hammer there, as we've missed, is to throw the hammer up in the air and then catch it on the way down and do all sorts of stuff. It's Donkey Kong 94. Oh god, it's just brilliant. It's one thing that you should seek out and probably seek out and pay for it on 3DS so that you can just enjoy it in its handheld format. It really is something pretty special. But speaking of retro-flavoured things, or retro-flavoured new things, let's have a look at Rare's arcade effort from June of '94. 10 years removed from Rare's release of Sabrewulf on the Spectrum in their Ultimate days, here we have another game from Rare, and even one with Sabrewulf in the game. This is Killer Instinct, which debuted in arcades in June of 1994. This was, I suppose, most notable for being the first in a series of arcade games. Cruis'n USA was another one that were put out by Nintendo, or distributed by Nintendo in collaboration with Midway, as a sort of platform for promotion of what would become the N64. What was at this point still Project Reality, being developed in conjunction with Silicon Graphics, was really just this nebulous idea that was set for release sometime in 1995, which would get pushed back to 1996. But the idea was that these arcade games would show you the true power of what to expect from the N64. Of course, the first Killer Instinct never did come to the N64, but Killer Instinct 2 did in the form of Killer Instinct Gold. And yeah, Killer Instinct would actually be later ported to the Super Nintendo later in the year, and then across even to the Game Boy, which is the version I played originally that was quite poor. I mean, it had its fans at the time, especially as this was kind of a bit more of a gritty beat-em-up on SNES compared to the muted form of Mortal Kombat. There are sort of execution moves in here and whatnot. But I think the real dedicated players would later be frustrated with the fact that there's not much skill involved. It's all kind of dial a combo, and if you know the ridiculously long button press sequences to do ridiculous combos, then you would never get beaten, or it's very sort of low, not particularly skill intensive. That said, I'm crap at it, and I'm not a really big fan of fighting games anyway, so we're watching someone else play here, but that's all there is to say about Killer Instinct. Yeah, it was certainly very pretty for the time, as you can see, but well, although it had a surge of popularity, it wasn't particularly amazing, and in actual fact the Xbox One re-release seems to have trumped the original in every way possible. Staying with fighting games, but going into the Amiga space with Elfmania next, and its incredibly cheesy art. This is most notable, I guess, for being really technically impressive on the Amiga 500, as we'll see, but also because of who made it. This is by Terramark, and, well, I suppose while Terramark themselves, their most significant contribution to gaming was Elfmania, which isn't that much. Its CEO, Jari Kriitinen, would later team up with Bloodhouse's Harry Tikkanen, and Bloodhouse had done Stardust before now, and between the two of them they would merge later in the 1990s to form Housemarque, who would eventually become known for Super Stardust HD and all of that stuff, on the PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, and certainly all the great games that they put out in downloadable form, Detonation notwithstanding. But in the meantime, this is a beat 'em up where you play elves with their weird squeaky voices, kind of just a bizarre style in in terms of art direction for the characters and in terms of audio direction, but it does look really, really impressive. You've got these layered animated backgrounds, which is remarkable for the aging hardware it was on. And the other gimmick it kind of had was this coin stuff. So rather than blood squirting out when you hit people, you would get coins, and then you use the coins to hire quote-unquote fighters or more leveled up fighters for the next round of fights. So that's kind of an interesting gimmick. You've got a map screen that you're moving around in and whatnot. But yeah, in and of itself, not an amazing game, especially not if you had played fighters on any other format, basically. Obviously, the Amiga really struggled with fighting games because it was this relic of an old age where it was predominantly built around one-button control, so it was a real challenge to get decent fighters on the system. Shadow Fighter was well received, Body Blows was well received, Elfmania was well received in some quarters, but I think mainly for its technical prowess rather than it's particularly engaging gameplay, but you can see that certainly Terramark had the chops here, as did Housemark in producing really technically stunning games on the Amiga. So it didn't it made sense that these guys would go on to form the company behind Resogun and such greats. So yeah, humble beginnings, I guess. Staying on a competitive note, here's Gravity Force 2, appearing in June 1994 on the Amiga. This product of a pair of friends, Jens Andersen and Jan Kronqvist, didn't follow up directly Gravity Force 1. Gravity Force 1 was a German-developed Amiga game that was largely forgotten, but these two were fans and were allowed permission to make a game called Gravity Force 2. And yeah, you're not going to see that much gameplay from me here because as I choose a map here, this was, although the first Gravity Force was single player or multiplayer, Gravity Force 2 was all about multiplayer, and I've been recording this on my own here, so yeah, Norman No Mate's making a multiplayer game recording, not all that great, but here's a game that I really have fond memories of back when it came out, because this was, and still is probably, to my mind, one of the best multiplayer experiences of all time. Certainly when it comes to local multiplayer. It's kind of very, if you think Thrust and Asteroids in terms of its momentum and physics concerned, and the fact that there is a force of gravity on everything, and then apply that to a deathmatch styled spaceship shooter. That's what we have with Gravity Force. There's different sort of features on each map. So on this map there's gun turrets that you can use to your advantage, and it's all about mastering these really, really tricky physics here to find and then take down your opponent. Pretty easily done here because it's just me playing. But yeah, unique, or kind of unique to games that were on the single button Amiga. You used the fire button to propel yourself forward, and then up to shoot, and down to drop bombs with chaotic effects as you're seeing here. And just that simple layer of play, but just tremendous stuff. And just to make things a little better, what we're seeing here is two other people that I've managed to find on the internet playing the Gravity Force 3, I guess, Amiga Power Magazine sanctioned sequel Gravity Power here, which added the trick of split screens combining when you were close to one another, which was momentarily distracting, and then it just sort of added to the chaos, but it let you see more of the level here. And Gravity Power also added things like collectible power-ups that could boost your shots. This was later on in 95, I believe this came out, and it also allowed more options. You could choose certain types of weapon before you started, each with their own benefits and drawbacks, as well as not just have bombs but different special weapons, on this sort of by moving the joystick downward. And there were also just a lot more maps. It was a lot more fully featured, in terms of just general gameplay wise. But yeah, it was all about finding your opponent, blasting them, landing on touchpads to rearm, refuel, and keep your shields on tack. And it was just all over, just brilliant, just one of the most addictive experience that I remember playing with my brother 20 years ago and fighting with him over. And for more on Gravity Force 2 from Jens Henson and Jan Kronqvist, do check out Kaiju Pop very, very soon, as we should have a full making of feature. Be careful that this isn't Jens Henson, one of the co-developers here, isn't the same Jens Henson that did work in AAA, as I found out. There is another Jens Henson who made The Darkness, amongst other things. A different guy, as I found out to my embarrassment when contacting him for an interview. We should have the real Jens Henson stopping by on kaijupop.com very soon to talk about Gravity Force 2 and Gravity Power. Indeed, just tremendous stuff, this. Staying with shooters, but more cooperative than competitive, this is Banshee, which came out on Amiga 1200s and CD32s from Core in June of 1994. So with Commodore going under, there would be declining support for the Amiga in its later months, but this was an Amiga exclusive and a really good one. It's a shmup, and I'm usually of the position where I like shmups, but I'm really bad at them, so that's what you're going to see here. And it seems kind of at first that this is, it does start you off slowly. There are only 4 levels in Banshee, but they're all very, very big and very, very long, and it kind of, you start playing this feeling, oh, okay, well, this is alright, but it's mainly sort of got the good reception that it did, simply because there's not much competition on the Amiga in terms of shmups. When you compare it certainly to the Mega Drive at the time, there were tons of shmups with plenty more going on, but the kind of more you play it, the more that does pop off, and the more you recognize that it is a very pretty looking game for the time, as we'll see sort of more of what it could do sort of from an art direction a little bit later on here. But also just from the way that it played, it's very much kind of a love letter to shmups in general. Obviously the connections to 1942, actually this is closer because of the bananas plot that there is. You're in an alternate timeline version of 1999, where microwave ovens haven't been invented and aliens are coming to attack Earth for some reason. I mean, once you get past that, it's similar, I suppose, in that regard to something more, absurd, like 1943 Kai, or something like that. But it's got the same barrel roll mechanic on one button to get out of trouble, as I'm using incredibly ineffectively here. But it's also the way it's designed, because it's got these long levels and then boss encounters and then more of the same long level. It feels kind of like Xevious in that regard. I think in general it's very much a sort of a love letter to console shooters and arcade shooters, and there weren't that many happening on the Amiga, except for independent PD games that were based off shoot 'em up construction kit. They were all pretty terrible. Yeah, so I mean, there wasn't much like this on the platform at the time, and this is, I mean, it's out and out. It's a good shooter. Two players can play at once. It's got a kind of steampunk feel to it, and just that and the art direction that there is here, where it's sprite art, but it's almost sort of cartoonish. It kind of feels similar to something like Jamestown, much later on, obviously. And that sort of lends it a real sort of unique edge. I think it's a shame really because I think of the platform that it came out on and it's British as opposed to Japanese or American roots. Banshee is a shmup that's very often forgotten, or not even forgotten, just not known about when it comes to people talking about the genre. But Banshee was really good, and good on its own, not necessarily just a good sort of tribute to shooters on other platforms. It did help that that there wasn't much competition on the Amiga, but it was pretty cool, and probably because of what's being moved about on the screen here, something that could only be done on a CD32 or something with the 32-bit AGA chipset, which made, I think, owners of those systems feel kind of special because much of what was being put out on the CD32 was something that a bug standard Amiga could do. But this kind of, the submarine coming from the surface here, and I think just from the art direction standpoint, and in terms of what's happening, this is something that could come out not that much changed. It could be re-released today on on Steam or as a PS4 indie game, and not be ridiculed. It does take a while to get going. I mean, I am terrible. I'm god awful at shooters, but you can see I have little problem with some of these earlier bosses here once I've sort of gotten myself settled. The pattern's reasonably easy to read, but I don't know how it was viewed just from a difficulty standpoint. I'm sure there are people that could that were used to playing Mega Drive shooters that would probably scoff at it from a bullet hell standpoint. But then again, we're playing this on easy here because I'm awful at old games in general, and games in general. I'm just awful. But I'm particularly awful at shmups and anything twitchy. But this was just a really good fun game from 1993, and just the more it was something that I tend to play each of these for a few minutes at a time, and then kind of have enough with the generic platformers that were coming out of the era. But Banshee was something that I wasn't too keen on when I started playing it, but the more you get into it, the more it sort of has its own character as something distinct from something like 1942 or other sort of arcane old shooters on other formats, and kind of turns into something of its own. I like as we'll move up just a little bit onto land, but this nice little weather effects like fog here. The soldiers coming across the bridge that you can shoot into the sea. That's it's kind of grim, but it's awesome. It's like those nice little touches that set it apart. So certainly this never came out on other formats, so you're gonna have to hunt out an Amiga copy or find a ROM somewhere. But it's well worth checking out if you're a shmup fan, and it's one of those things that could easily, that was great, the people running out with their heads on fire. It's something that could easily make a return, and I wouldn't be too surprised at all. Banshee from June 94 rather, really good. Going from 2D shmup to 3D racing, and we have Stunt Race FX from Nintendo EAD and Argonaut on the Super Nintendo, the Super Famicom. Actually, this was out only in Japan in June of 1994, where it was known as WildTrax, and it was the second game to make use of the FX chip, the sort of kind of crude 3D accelerator for Super Nintendo systems that was included on cartridges, which lets you show off some admittedly windowed and not amazing frame rate, but yeah, in this small Xbox format, it's very impressive 3D in this underwater scene here. But yeah, the first, of course, was Argonaut's Star Fox, and then this was sort of developed alongside Stunt Racer X. It was a kind of a weird time because the arcades were pushing towards 3D, and that was where the next generation was going to go with the PlayStation and the Saturn. But in the meantime, it was, I suppose, kind of an idea, you know, a desire to show off what some PC games were able to do and what arcade games were able to do. By sort of 3D, shoehorning 3D acceleration into consoles that had no right running this stuff. So that's where Stunt Racer X came from, that's where Star Fox came from, and that's also where, on the Sega side of things, the Mega Drive version of Virtua Racing came from, which also had a 3D accelerator in it. But, I mean, at this point, Nintendo had already partnered with Silicon Graphics for the N64, as I mentioned earlier on. So that kind of put FX games in a weird position where they were developed for a little while, and in fact there was a second version of the FX chip that would be in games like Yoshi's Island for some of the 3D effects that were in that. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't as exploited a technology as it could have been. Star Fox 2, of course, famously, was finished and ready to be shipped, and then it got canned because by that time people were, you know, Nintendo wanted to focus on the N64 in terms of marketing and all the rest of it. So it was kind of this technology that was impressive, and it meant the SNES could do, the Super Famicom could do an awful lot more than it should have been able to, but not quite as exploited as it could have been. But still, Stunt Racer X, even with its tiny window 3D, is a lot of fun. I enjoyed Stunt Racer X an awful lot. And it has that Nintendo EAD sort of F-Zero style structure and feel to it. It's very much an arcade game built for the home from the ground up, you know. So there is this structure of beating the clock and having bonus rounds where you're driving this truck around as far as you can, bashing over gates. But it is, you know, this as much a race against the clock and going through checkpoints as it is beating your opponents, but it's really enjoyable. These sequences are bloody difficult, and yeah, I mean, you can see the 3D there, but of course, I mean, you have to remember when you're looking at these things that this looks bloody awful now. At the time, it was moderately impressive, I suppose. But I think even at this point, even though we'd seen some of what was going to come onto PlayStation and Saturn imminently, and we were in that awkward phase between generations at this point, this did start looking rather crude already. You know, it did look rather crude. It makes me think kind of, you know, what could have been done had this actually been a 2D racing game with more traditional Mode 7 stuff. But at the same time, there is some like cool effects. I think just the vertiginous nature of tracks like this Canadian one is kind of exploited by the FX chip. And yeah, for whatever, it is just the way that it's put together and how EAD put together their games for Nintendo, and it's strange how Nintendo at one point were racing games centric. You know, they were putting out tons of racing games, you know, because they're unlike today where we just have Mario Kart. Back then there was of course Mario Kart, but there was also this Stunt Racer X, and there was going to be a sequel. a sequel planned with the N64, which would have been called Buggy Boogie. And I remember seeing that in magazines, and there were just sort of sporadic screenshots, and then the game never ever appeared. But, you know, I mean, there were games like this, and then there was F-Zero, and then there was Rave Race. You know, I mean, there were more than one racing franchise in the Nintendo scene back in the day, and that there isn't anymore is a shame, because these EAD developed racing games actually really good. What the heck happened there? A bunch of dogs running across the road. And yeah, there's this typical, much as with F-Zero, this balance of using your boost judiciously. Well, it's much like F-Zero X. Let's go. Yeah, I mean, sure, you have to squint a little bit just to look at the screen. It's all hands in the window, let alone you know, squint to kind of make the game look as good as you might remember it looking. But yeah, I think Stunt Race FX is often kind of criminally overlooked and forgotten, which is a bit of a shame, you know, and. You know, it offered a lot of cool stuff, not just racing as well, but there's a stunt mode in here too, which we're not going to get to because you know, there's still one track to get through here. Yeah, but there's more kind of, hey, let's off-road stunty tracks, and there's a battle mode in here as well. There's an awful lot of game for the buck, and even though technically, I mean, you could say this isn't much more than a tech demo for this FX hardware, or you'd be forgiven for thinking that, just looking at it. But actually, there's an awful lot of game in here, and that's awesome. So, yeah, Stunt Race FX, kind of an oft-forgotten game that I really kind of like. But let's go on to one game which is very fondly remembered from the summer of 1994 to wrap this up. Last release of a busy month, and it's probably the one with the most nostalgia attached to it, Earthworm Jim. Earthworm Jim is a game that I came to late, mainly because I didn't have a Mega Drive when this came out in 1994 or Super Nintendo, but it was always something that appealed because of its cartoonishness, and you know, I mean, it was really sort of heralded, and it always has like a lot of nostalgia, as I said, attached to it right now, even today. There we go, we've launched the counter, and we'll just play into an intro right at the end of the game. You know, it always has a lot of fond memories attached to it, I think mainly just because of its character design and its sense of humor more than anything else. But it's always something that I kept on coming back to when I could play it on a Mega Drive. I did get it, and didn't really like it. But then I thought, something has to be wrong with me. It's partly because, as you can see, I'm rubbish at it. You know, something has to be wrong with me. So when it came out on the Game Boy, I picked it up on the Game Boy, and yeah, the Game Boy Advance, and I didn't enjoy it. And I even picked up the HD PS3 version of the game, which for some bloody reason, Gameloft, the mobile clone game company, had the rights to produce this really, frankly, awful HDified soulless version of Earthworm Jim, and they had to redo the voice work, and it was, yeah, all kind of all over the place and not very good. But yeah, every time I'm like, oh, Earthworm Jim, yeah, everybody says that's good, I should keep trying at it and keep, you know, trying to enjoy it, and I just don't. It's the floatiness of Jim, as good as his design is. The jumping doesn't feel right to me. I don't know, I find it irritating to be attacked from sort of 360 degrees of angles here, but only, you know, from being able to be killed from every axis, but only being able to defend yourself from 8 of them. That irritates me. I don't know. I know I'm alone in this, largely, but I find Earthworm Jim immensely irritating, to be honest with you, and it's never something that I got particularly far in either. So that's kind of part of it. I think, you know, a good deal of it is that it's not an easy game, and I'm bad at it. And that's always the way, but I kind of find it's better done than a lot of the Me Too platformers we wind up having a look at in this video feature, because 1994 was kind of full of them. Characterization aside, it's still just as annoying, I think, as most of the games of this era were. So yeah, I don't know. But I mean, you can definitely make a case for its popularity based solely on its character design. You know, this spawn of Saturday morning kids TV show. You know, in the era of mid-90s cartoon shows that were actually awesome. You know, where we were in the midst of the golden era of Animaniacs and Ren and Stimpy and The Tick, and Earthworm Jim came a little bit after that, I think, but you know, not too far after it to sort of evade that generation, and so that kind of has helped it attain this sort of, as I said, fond, warm memories and big sense of nostalgia that sort of lingered with it today. I don't think it's a particularly great game. That's just my opinion today. And my opinion obviously is incorrect. But we're going to fight the trash monster here. So yeah, Earthworm Jim as well, one of those things where I think partly because it was a franchise that started right as we were on a generational leap, and it spawned a sequel that would head to PlayStation and things like that, but at that point people were hungry for 3D experiences, and then it was one of many platformers that just couldn't make the transition to 3D particularly well at all. So you know, that kind of ruined things. For Earthworm Jim, it just didn't. There was Earthworm Jim 64, which really wasn't a very good game at all. So you know, that kind of ruined things for Jimmy. But still, I think just because of the fact that there were relatively few installments in this franchise, it gives it a lot more, it means a lot of those memories are sort of uncluttered and, or unspoiled, and I think that's why it probably has a lot more nostalgia attached to it. By all means, by all other accounts, not a bad game, just one I don't really like. But that's all the releases we have for you for June 1994, for a complete retrospective on 94, 84 and 2004. Check out kaijupop.com for that full written feature. And Chris Charm for kaijupop.com. Thanks for watching. Bye.